All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffany, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. Give me one. And it is my pleasure to present our speaker for today, who is Erik Burrow. And he's giving a very apt presentation, talking about the legacy of Remembrance, the World War One monuments located throughout New Jersey. And given that yesterday was Veterans Day, it is extremely timely to talk about this. And this is something that we don't really think about as much. Not only is Veterans Day on the 11th, that's also the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th hour when the Armistice of World War One was signed. So it kind of has a twofold meaning that Erik's going to be discussing today. And just a little information about Erik, and then some housekeeping items before we jump into his presentations. He is a graduate of Rider University and is the founder of Penn Jerdal House in Burlington, New Jersey, which is a history advocacy group supporting public awareness of regional heritage and proponents of landmark preservation. He encourages increased use of historical markers and protection of public art, monuments, and historic sites. Erik has been a principal speaker at a wide range of history-related events, conventions, conferences, and ceremonies in 12 states and 5 countries. He has addressed the Pennsylvania Assembly 5 times and has also appeared at the capitals of New Jersey, Delaware, and Washington. He has been featured at the U.S. Park Service sites in Manhattan and Philadelphia, and as a Cunard Line guest lecturer during Atlantic crossings. So again, welcome, Erik. Thank you so much for uh, agreeing to speak to our patrons today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So
Um,
let's see, we'll just hit this. We're doing multiple sharing. I can't.
you should be okay.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I seem to have a window. I don't know if you're seeing someone else is sharing. Is
Not yet. Did you hit the green share button?
I can't see the share button.
Okay, hit the escape there.
I did, and send a request, then hit
Okay.
the again. Wonderful. Thank you.
All right.
Good
We're
afternoon.
we're still not seeing it.
You're not seeing?
No. I think you have to go back and go through the share process again.
Okay. Share entire screen.
All right, and then just hit the play button.
There we go.
There.
Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, I think we're on the second slide. Yep, there you go.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erik Burrow, and it gives me a great pleasure to share with you the fact that Armistice Day has sort of been subsumed by um, Veterans Day, and yet the two are so intertwined. We often forget about Armistice Day as we celebrate all of those who serve our country in the military. And yet, it was many of the traditions first established during World War One that we carry forward as part of our military traditions in this country. The most important thing, and often we direct our attention to monuments on what used to be Dedication Day or Decoration Day and is now Memorial Day, but we really should not separate the meaning of Armistice Day since it was such a cataclysmic event that took place just a little more than a century ago. The reminders of World War One are essential that we make decisions in our own time based on the experience that we had then. Now, here in New Jersey, New Jersey, small as our state is, had a disproportionate share of the burden of what World War I was all about. You may recall, since none of us were there, but from your history lesson, that President Wilson, former governor of New Jersey, kept us out of the war. And even when he was reelected, promised to keep us out of the war. But the war in Europe continued to increase, the casualties increased at the point at which we finally, after losing ships to German U-boats, in after 2 years of the war continuing on the Western Front and the Eastern Front, and allies losing millions of soldiers, the United States declared war, and we were late in coming. However, we were to make a big difference, and it was a difference that brought about the final conclusion about a year and a half later. The remarkable thing was America's contribution was at a time when we had about 250,000 soldiers. We mobilized once it was decided that we were going to participate as a direct ally, not just an ally with supplies. We created an army of about 4 million military. And the great price that we paid for that, as difficult as it is to wrap your mind around 116, 117,000 dead for America, the numbers were in the millions as far as the major European allies. The World War I cost about 40 million lives in total throughout all of Western Europe. Now, here in New Jersey, as a result of that great experience of participating in what was industrial warfare on a scale beyond anything the world had ever experienced before, America and New Jersey ended up expanding its role of participation and leadership in the world. And it did it somewhat reluctantly at first. The cost to American lives here in New Jersey was about 14,000 soldiers. However, New Jersey was very much like a funnel, and it ended up providing the training and the facilities and the embarkation for many of the troops. In fact, over 2 million troops left from Hoboken, New Jersey. Now, as a result of the World War I experience here in our state, we have about 300 monuments, and that includes monuments that are architectural monuments, statues, plaques on large boulders, a variety of remembrances. But today I'm only going to talk about the figurative monuments, those that have statues that are part of the monument, that give us a visual representation or a symbolic representation of what World War I was all about. And as you look at this list, you may well see your own hometown. For out of the 300 monuments, over 60 of them have figures that could be a soldier, could be an allegorical figure of victory. Most common throughout the state are granite monuments that you could see in almost any other state in the Union. This is typical. These were manufactured in New England, in Vermont, and New Hampshire, and they are almost lookalikes throughout the country. There's another group of monuments that are quite standardized, and this was among those that were metal symbols, or in this case, known as a doughboy or Spirit of the American Doughboy Monument. This was the most popular figurative monument in the country. If they were going to have a bronze monument, and this is actually uh, an alloy of bronze, it's not a full bronze monument. This was the least expensive one that could be purchased from a catalog. And here in New Jersey, we have 7 of them. This one is in Belmar, but you'll find another 6 in towns as far as Frenchtown, Matawan, and other towns. However, what we have in New Jersey that's so extraordinary is we have a number of original monuments, and I have been doing for the last 3-4 years a series of photographic exhibitions that are highlighting specifically those monuments that are one of a kind, that are specific to the towns where they stand today. In other words, you won't find that monument anywhere else. And I'm just mentioning at this point that if you happen to be in Atlantic County for the next month or so, there will be a special exhibit at the Atlantic County Veterans Museum where you can see some of the monuments that I'm referring to, a few of which I will be highlighting, and some that you will not see at that exhibit, which consists of about 30 monuments. Um, Here are some of the best in New Jersey of the original monuments. Now, for me, there's no better one to start with because I made mention of Hoboken. Hoboken was literally the port of embarkation for over 2 million. Now, mind you, we had 4 million soldiers, and over 2 million were sent to Europe. And the majority of them were going through the port of New York and Hoboken, New Jersey. Why was that? Because the major steamship lines had terminals in Hoboken, which belonged to the German steamship companies, and we nationalized those and used them for our own troops. I like this. Starting off with, this is a happy monument. It's a happy monument, although its title, embarkation, debarkation, means leaving and returning. But this obviously is a monument that's showing a joyous event of return. And this is close to the waterfront that everyone remembers. Well, maybe some of you who are younger do not remember, but on the waterfront was a 1950s motion picture blockbuster with Marlon Brando. And in those days, Hoboken, New Jersey was not gentrified. It was a hard scrabble steamship town, a maritime port, and it was a rough and tumble place. Now, if you look in the background behind this monument, you see $1 million apartments. That's probably thinking low numbers. It has become gentrified, but in this town, made very popular by Frank Sinatra, it was his birthplace. You notice at the base of the pedestal, there are 2 bireme prows going back to antiquity, showing symbolically a military leaving, departure, and a return. These are the doughboys returning, and it was taken right there in Hoboken. Now we're going to switch downstate because the majority of figurative monuments are in North Jersey because the southern portion of our state is mostly agrarian if you go back 100 years. And one of the reasons I'm doing this series is because many of these monuments are now celebrating their 100th anniversary. You'll notice this one was dedicated in 1923. That's exactly 100 years ago. Well, 100 years plus one. And I can tell you, if you'd looked at this monument last year, it was deep verdigris. It was a green monument and it needed scrubbing and rehabilitation. And such is the case for many of our monuments. But this doughboy, known as the Rock of the Marne, not far from a highway that was named after World War I, the Marne Highway, that links Mount Holly with Moorestown. This was a symbolic memorial hall for the newly emerged American Legion, which was founded around the same time in the 1920s. And this particular American Legion Hall was the hometown of Colonel Franklin D. Ollier. Now, that name may not ring a bell with you, but he was one of the 20 original founders. The American Legion itself was founded in Paris, and he was its first president and national commander. And he came from Burlington, New Jersey. And ironically, there is a cemetery named after General William Doyle. And that cemetery I think it's close to Wrightstown, that general, also from Burlington, New Jersey, was the national commander of the American Legion in their 50th year. So Burlington has some rightful bragging rights. Key to shipbuilding and ship outfitting in preparation for all of the support that New Jersey was to provide for the troops is a most unusual statue. It's called the Soldiers' Memorial Benediction. And interestingly, at the top of this, underneath this statue, are the names of those who died from Kearney. But at the top, the sentiment that everyone was speaking of after World War I, that there shall be a commanding voice, a conscious civilization against the future of armed warfare. The mood after World War I was this must never, ever happen again. And even as solemn as that sentiment is, behind the benediction figure is a reminder on three sides of the obelisk of what that industrial warfare was all about. And it's a sad reminder as I look at this bas-relief image that's been chiseled into the granite, that there are doughboys emerging from a trench and tanks in the foreground and soldiers at a trench off in the distance. How far have we come? This, just with different helmets and different tanks, could be Ukraine today. And on the second side of that obelisk is a reminder of the great peril that existed with the success of the U-boats as the principal means of stopping those steamships that were headed from Hoboken, New Jersey, and the port of New York off to the Western Front and France and Belgium. And here we have a destroyer, an American destroyer, threatening the existence of this U-boat. On the backside, the north side, is a reminder of a new type of warfare. Inventors and the Wright brothers did not have exclusivity on fixed wing aircraft, although they certainly had a rightful place at the pinnacle of those successes. There were others also that designed and built early aircraft and all thought that once the aircraft was perfected, war would be impossible. Why, you could see what was going on. There'd be no invasions without seeing what was taking place. As it turned out, the aircraft became a very mobile and adaptable weapon of war. And America was actually far behind the Europeans. Now, I want to jump to Jersey City, where a building that you can still see today at Dickinson High School used to be a technical institute where young men with technical aptitudes went to learn how to provide the skills that were necessary for the ammunition and supply side of the war effort that started in 1914 and was a big part of the support before we would be using our own manpower to support the war effort. This is done by Carl Alava, who is more well known for 6 different doughboys that can be seen in Central Park in New York City. Notice it too was dedicated in 1922, yet the high school has no idea who made this. They have no records of its dedication. Uh, the, the monument is kind of out there, but with no information and rarely any celebration adjacent to it, although it was certainly a principal bit of pride in the 1920s. Down in South Jersey, you had R. Tate McKenzie, who was a professor for physical education and a medical doctor from Canada, who went to the University of Pennsylvania for his advanced research on the use of new techniques to increase performance of athletics and merging athletic programs with the academic program at the University of Pennsylvania. He himself would serve in the military on behalf of the British military, and then he returned here and became an American citizen. He provided several statues that are extraordinary. One is in Oxford at the university with English soldiers. And this one, he was willing to provide his talents and show an American doughboy completely outfitted with uniform and appropriate accoutrements. This is done, and if you look closely, you will see the featured football player of the University of Pennsylvania Quakers as his model. Interestingly, that professor, and I've forgotten his last name right now, ended up for about 30 years being head coach of the football team at the high school in Atlantic City. Now, one of the things about American pride in going back to the American Revolution, which we will soon be celebrating here in New Jersey, the 250th, is that we look upon American soldiery not as a standing army, but an army of citizen soldiers that can be called for when needed. And this marvelous statue by Charles Niehaus shows an American basically a local townsman, could be a farmer, just a citizen soldier. And this is in a wonderful expanse in front of the courthouse in Hackensack, of the courthouse of Bergen County. This statue epitomizes the citizens' solidarity when called upon. In other words, a tribute to the Minuteman, who will soon put on a soldier when called to help protect the nation and the nation's interests. The base has a wonderful bas relief by Niehaus, which shows one side the American troops under George Washington, and on the flip side, another scenario of trench warfare. This interesting statue called Hands Off in Bloomingdale, Passaic County, shows an interesting thought of Jules Melidon. Now, Jules Melidon was a Frenchman who had served in the French army back in the 1890s, and he came to America as an immigrant. He was a teacher at the University of Pennsylvania. He did architectural sculptures. He remembered when the Germans first invaded France before World War I. And he was from originally Alsace-Lorraine, which had seen the Germans invade his country once before. And he was very indignant as a new American to do a statue that honored the American soldier who was helping the French soldiers protect themselves against the invading Huns, as they were called. This statue, however, is unusual in as it's not showing that the rifle is in a position of thrust or in a position of firing. He's holding the rifle, and the term hands off with an extended arm, it just struck me as so different from most doughboy statues until I discovered, and this took a lot of digging because there's not a lot about Jules around, it turned out that he became a Quaker and was very much an anti-belligerent or pacifist. And so his soldier is taking a more pacifistic perspective and saying hands off, holding the flag, as well as the rifle, but not shown in a military stance. In a much more military stance is Brooklynite Pietro Montana, who has several doughboy monuments here in New Jersey and one in Brooklyn. These monuments, you know, it was very difficult for, there was certainly popularity to have your own monument in your own town. And Waunakee in Passaic County is a small town, to be sure. But in order to be able to afford one, if you wanted an individualized monument, well, bronze was an expensive alternative. And this is one of the monuments that was made in zinc. And there were several others that he created, and the zinc does not hold up. This monument, close up, appears quite robust. And certainly the figure is shown as a robust soldier. But within the next few years, unless extensive work is done on this and the other zinc monuments, most of them, as one has already done, will deteriorate. This is one reason why I'm not showing the connection at the base. This is another one of those by Montana in North Arlington. There's an extraordinary bronze monument that's at the base Now, this is Newark, the biggest city in New Jersey, and it has several World War I monuments. This is a spectacular monument. Artistically, this is done by the same artist who did that citizen soldier. And this symbolically is quite extraordinary because it's a flagpole of 65 feet high. And at the base of the flagpole, in the tradition of classical sculptors, he's showing soldiers who are really like naked. So it's not intended to be, it's intended to show soldiery through the ages and not in the 20th century. However, this is a tribute to soldiers. And on the 8 sides of this marvelous pedestal, you see bas reliefs that are showing close ups of antiquity and the traditions. This is, by the way, the statue and the flagpole. Brotherhood, sacrifice, and discipline. And the names are all so extensive. The 21,000 Newark citizens who served in World War I, their names are encapsulated within this base. And there are 3 other bas relief of early classic soldiers. Now, in Newark, this was not done specifically for World War I, but it was dedicated in 1926. So it is, in fact, a post World War I dedication. But it's dedicated, if you look on the extreme left of the statue, you will see a continental officer. That's a tri-cornered hat. And that's George Washington. And all of the soldiery behind him are from various periods. The Spanish-American War. This close-up is showing a conscientious objector with his hands in his pockets and a doughboy making a patriotic plea to help participate. There are 42 figures in this statue done by Gutzon Borglum, who is more known for the statue of the presidents out in North Dakota. But here, he was given the opportunity of creating this All Wars of America for Military Park, which was the site of the American Revolutionary drilling of soldiers, continental soldiers, here in the state of New Jersey. There are 2 full-size horses and 42 figures. If most of us have been driving past Military Park, it's well worth your time to take a walk around this monument, dedicated in 1926. And the reason he got this commission was because he had been tasked for an extraordinary statue of Abraham Lincoln, which you can see at another time in front of Essex County Courthouse. Now, while here in Newark, one of the major contributors, not only providing officers and enlisted men, was Prudential Life Insurance Company, one of the largest entities and employers in Newark, even still today. These are all the names of the people who they lost in the war. And this is a bas relief Art Deco style of victory being shown in their lobby of the older building. I should point out, when I mentioned Franklin D. Ollier, who had helped create the American Legion, he would end up becoming the board chairman of Prudential, and Prudential ended up becoming a major insurance company for the lives of many soldiers who served in World War I, providing and helping to provide benefits to those who were left behind. their families. In Patterson, a wonderful statue, really been ignored. It's actually supposed to be symbolic, looking very much like Athena of ancient Greece, but it is symbolic of America. And if you look close up, the detail of this is extraordinary. And this statue was done by Gaetano Federici, who was an immigrant who made his home in Patterson. And there are probably more statues of dignitaries in Patterson by one artist, this artist, than any other city within New Jersey. He was literally the patron of the arts within Patterson. And this was one of the early dedications in 1920. Originally, as you know, Patterson's major um, attraction is the site where Alexander Hamilton had proposed the first industrialization in the state of New Jersey, largely because of the presence of the Great Falls of Patterson. And this was at one time a waterway that passed by, and there was a beautiful fountain around this statue. None of that has remained. But fortunately, the statue, which does need some revitalization, still exists today. Here is a close-up of the base of that statue and a wonderful bas relief of the various participants that provided for the American side in providing fortification and assistance to the Allies. We see there, second from the left, an American aviator, an entirely new title, something that was created as a result of World War I. And this is only one of just a few that give proper recognition to the role that women played. However, women have been symbolically used as figures for victory. And so it is an Art Deco symbol for victory in Clifton in Passaic County. Now, what's beautiful about this, Clifton never provided for any of the wars or conflicts after that. And this is somewhat typical. World War I created a groundswell of support for public art that was individualized and very specific to its communities. Since then, most towns usually use a large stele or plaque, maybe a large piece of granite with some artwork on it. What has happened in many communities, like Clifton, is if you look closely, you will notice that the names of other conflicts are shown above the head of victory. That's because they've never created anything that surpassed that for any of the conflicts and memorials since. And such is the case for many towns and townships within New Jersey. For example, here in East Rutherford, here is a classic design. It actually goes back to Grecian times, which of course was quite common among the sculptors of the day. Here is a symbolic victory symbolizing East Rutherford's participation in the war and the contribution that its citizens made. It's very similar, in fact, to a Civil War monument that sits in front of City Hall in Jersey City by another artist. These two artists were a father and son, and their greatest claim to fame was they provided the upsizing of many of the artists that we'll be seeing in this presentation as they were preparing for the foundry, because many artists created their original work smaller than it appeared, such as this one that's sitting Victory in front of Belleville in Essex County. This is an example of a statue that was much smaller, but was upsized by the Ettel brothers and son and made to a much larger size. This is a perfect example of the kind of environmental soot and quality of air that we've experienced. This statue is not only green from oxidation, but it is dirty. And I have been one of those who've said, invest in some money. If you can barely see on the name of the shield are all those who were lost in the war from the town of Belleville. Very similar in style is another one done by James Novelli. James Novelli's statue here was placed on a large boulder, which, as you know, are quite common in North Jersey. This is in Jersey City. And when it was placed here, there was a biplane, probably from a leftover from World War I, that was hired. And for 2.5 hours, it circled this site and dropped flowers one at a time, red roses. So there were like 222 red roses dropped at the foot or base of this statue when it was dedicated in 1922. At the edge of this park, which used to be the water reservoir for Jersey City, you will see what is left of and rebuilt. The entry, symbolically, to Pershing Park is the former entry of the local New Jersey National Guard Armory, which all major cities within New Jersey had at that time. In Englewood, New Jersey, you will see a statue of a doughboy done by Harry Lewis Roll. He lived in Orange, New Jersey. While close up, it looks like it's standing alone, but it's actually within a traffic circle. It is one of the few monuments that is illuminated night and day. And it is a statue, excuse me, I didn't want to, statue to the war dead of Englewood. And it's actually at the same location where a Liberty pole used to stand back in Revolutionary War days. He also created in Philadelphia this marvelous statue. We only have one or two other memorials in the state of New Jersey that pay tribute to Gold Star mothers, a term that was created during and after World War I. This statue by Roll shows a sailor and a doughboy, the sons of the many mothers who gave up their sons for the war effort. That entire tradition began when a pennant was placed in the window with a blue star to symbolize a member of the family serving in World War I. Some families had 2 and 3 and 4. Some towns had banners like this with 100 blue stars. And if you had a family member or community member that you lost, the banner would be replaced with a gold star. And this is where that symbol comes from. The best of the Gold Star remembrances is one that was dedicated around 1920 and can be found here in Hudson City, or Union City in Hudson County. Now, what is unusual here in Cliffside Park is a statue that's not showing a romanticized soldier. This is war and the reality of war. This doughboy is shown with a sloped stance. He's exhausted. If you look close up at him, you will notice that His clothes are tattered and he is exhausted. Newman, who was the artist for this, very cleverly, I'm certain that he was behind this. This statue is placed in such a way, I've been to this site multiple times. It is a small pocket park dedicated as a memorial park. The sun never casts a shadow on the face. The face is always in shadow. In other words, this slovenly, exhausted soldier, exhausted from the battlefield, is shown in the monument as the centerpiece of this park. And with, with not seeing his face, he is looking down at four cenotaphs, which take their place at the base of large trees that are along the path that goes down the slope to the other end of the park. When you look at it, the positioning of this statue takes on symbolism that only the sun is able to provide. It illuminates the site, but the shadow also provides part of the impact. And as I talk about impact, we're very lucky in New Jersey, although down in South Jersey, we used to have a lot more railroads. But now we still have like the second largest state-owned railroad company in the nation. And railroads played a major role in providing not only soldiers, but munitions and going from manufacturers such as J&J for medical supplies and bringing men from across the country by rail. There were no air transportation. Rail was the key, both for coming and going. And here in Orange, New Jersey, you have a wonderful statue. The symbolism of the ship at the base of the monument is showing that he is preparing for departure. He's got his campaign hat and his kit. Basically, he could be first on his way. Before he gets there, he may be on his way to further training, which takes place in New Jersey at Fort Dix, or takes place at Crestkill, which is kitting out for the final departure. One of the most beautiful sights. It gained national attention, was in Montclair, New Jersey, at the Edgemont Park. This three-figure statue, symbolically showing Columbia on her shield is the symbol of America. She is protecting both soldier and sailor as they go off to war and return victorious. When I say return victorious, because Charles Keck made not only this marvelous statue, and the obelisk that is behind it. Here's a close-up of the artist, and it gives you a sense of scale of the characters. There they are in clay before they are made into permanent bronze. Here you see the close-up of the three figures, and at the very top of the obelisk is a victory figure. This entire memorial monument, which received a national award from the Architectural League of New York, recognizing it as, by the way, there was no national World War I monument in 1926, nor was there 50 years ago. If there's time, we will talk briefly about the fact that finally a World War I monument was created, and it was created here in New Jersey, but I'm not highlighting that today. This entire monument, which could easily have been placed in Washington and been a wonderful representation of memorialization, and on its base is the Constitution of the United States. The lower illustration shows that by hand, if you look closely, you will see that every patch for a division or a brigade or a battalion is represented in the entire base, individually etched into the granite of the base. The entire statue and monument are on an island surrounded by water, and the major portion is a lake uh, in the center of Edgemont Park. This is a fantastic memorialization and one of the best in New Jersey. In Irvington, the ideal of the American soldier. This is also by Charles Keck, who did the preceding. It shows not only a soldier, but what he represents. He's carrying the American Constitution, he's carrying the American flag. Behind him is um, a severed tree showing that youth, representing youth, going off from their learning, from college education, going off to serve the country. There are tools behind him that show the industry of America. Many of the early workers of America stopped everything and went to serve, and it's representative of the citizen soldier. Down in South Jersey, a typical doughboy in action. This was done by the same artist that supplied Franklin Lloyd Wright with many of his sculptures. But he did this originally for Jersey City, and Jersey City wanted to do something else. So it ended up in Camden County, and it's one of the few monuments that have figures in Camden County. Little Falls has another one by Charles Keck, and this shows versatility. As far as artists representing New Jersey, Charles Keck has be the top of the list. Look at this statue. Its elegance, it shows a tribute to the men who served. It's an allegorical figure, and yet on the back it shows an Excalibur sword and all the names of those who participated from Little Falls. And this one he did, very sad. It's located in East Orange, New Jersey. It was on the site of a parade ground that is now kind of an overlooked ball field, and it's covered with graffiti. I've had to show it close up. I am hoping that it can be revitalized. It's behind what is a library, and perhaps one day there is room in front of that library. It might better be protected if it was in front of the library. And look closely at all the names that represented East Orange. And these were originally done, of course, this entire monument seated on top of a granite pedestal. This entire monument is bronze, but all that original type for the names was done in clay and then cast. I want to quickly go to Atlantic City. Everyone who's been to Atlantic City, going up Atlantic and down Pacific, sooner or later you cross over where Route 30 enters the lower portion of the town. In 1922, after World War I, Atlantic City was a booming town. There may have been prohibition elsewhere, but Atlantic City was wide open. And Atlantic City was popular because New Yorkers could get there on the Blue Comet directly from Jersey City, and the Pennsylvania Railroad from Philadelphia. Both major urban areas sent people by the millions to Atlantic City. And with that money, it built a memorial of its own, a Grecian rotunda. And then after they built it, they realized, well, we have all the major names of the battles in which America proved successful in helping bring an end to the war. but we need something inside. And after 14 years, and many of you who work in Trenton certainly know the large statue um, that stands in Princeton, New Jersey, by Frederick McManus, who is to George Washington in the Battle of Princeton. It stands 3.5 stories high and can be seen right there on Witherspoon Street, or just off Witherspoon Street. That statue took over 14 years to create. And because it got so much notoriety and the dedication of the president in 1922 in Princeton, Atlantic City said, we want a statue and we want to use a famous artist. Why don't we get Frederick McManus to make a statue for our building? And so he said, yes, I've been working on something. It had taken him, by the way, 14 years to do the Princeton Monument because he had started that in France. And the war came so close to his studio that he had to abandon his studio and start all over again back in America. So after many years of anticipation, it took that long for that monument. So he got special recognition in the post-war years because of that effort. So he does this wonderful statue. Now, I say wonderful because when you talk about art is not necessarily beautiful. It must be truthful. And he had himself, as an American artist, had experienced firsthand the degradation that was happening to the landscape and the population of France and Belgium. And he showed that in his monument. And he said, this is what I remember of World War I. And when I first viewed this, I have to say, it made me stop and think, this is grotesque. And then I looked at it again and I realized this is really personification of war at its worst. And it's called, Atlantic City has been calling it Liberty or Miss Liberty in Distress. But in reality, this figure, this female figure, is France herself showing her resistance, crying out for help and not resisting, giving. And this very monument that Atlantic City, by the way, discovered that a group of wealthy Americans gave to France after the war in 1932 was recreated in a scale that's 65 feet high and done strictly out of concrete, rather out of granite blocks, which meant that it took about 6 years to create, in memory of the first Battle of the Marne, which was in 1916, when the war effort really began and the invasion of the Germans into French-owned territory had begun. When Atlantic City learned about this, they said, wait a minute, we thought we had got an original monument. Why have you created this? And he said, as an artist, it's an entirely different representation and different material. And Atlantic City wanted to sue him and realized that they had no grounds for such a suit. And how proud we should be as Americans. I have seen this statue myself, and it stands there proudly as a gift to the French people and remembrance of the ambulance corps and the Americans field service, which were two groups that provided aid to the French before we ended up sending soldiers. And speaking real quickly, a mystery that takes place here in New Jersey. Here is a French monument right here in Ocean County. According to Ocean County, well, they thought it was a mystery, and then they said, oh no, this used to be the property of the Wanamaker Company. We think that they just purchased this because there were soldiers that served in the military in France during World War I. And take one look. This is actually a duplicate that was sent as a gift to the second son of the John Wanamaker Company, not a purchase, and it still stands. It's now on municipal property, and it is one of over 200 monuments that were created to show the distance over which the Western Front was, from the North Sea all the way to the Swiss border, where the intrusion of the Germans upon foreign territory had taken place. And what it says in French is, here was at Verdun is where the enemy was stopped. So this is actually a tribute, a gift, hardly recognized during his lifetime, but certainly recognized by the French government, of Rodman Wanamaker, who not only provided aid and comfort, he sent a shipload of medical supplies to the French. He provided a large property that he owned, a chateau, which he owned in France, and it was used for bringing up orphans, war orphans during the war. He received, for all of his participation in aiding the French as a civilian, on multiple occasions, he received the French Medal of Honor, and was also the official delegate, and provided the escort for Black Jack Pershing when he returned to America, and was here for dedication of many of the major monuments here in New Jersey. And I'm going to end with this particular one, which is where many of the soldiers had their final 10 days before they left for Hoboken and the Western Front. There is an obelisk at this site. It also is a traffic circle. It used to be you knew you were in New Jersey if there was a traffic circle. We have started to eliminate many of them, but this one will not be eliminated. There is a 60-foot obelisk, but on the back side of the obelisk, so it's on the inner side of the traffic circle, along with park foliage, you do not see this magnificent 15-foot Art Deco American doughboy, not showing, of course, a machine gun or the war weapons of modern war, but the symbolic weapons of ancient Greece, showing an American doughboy. Robert Atkins himself had served in the military. Here is that obelisk. Yet even as a result of there were about 10,000 men per week that were turned over. This site was so large, it covered 3 townships of New Jersey. It's up by Cresskill, Dumont. 3 townships were providing all the military lodging and supply side distribution for at the rate of 10,000 soldiers per week. They would come in by rail car. They would get their final kit that they would be taking with them to France. And then they'd take a ferry down the river to Hoboken for being shipped out. This site also had war dead as a result of the influenza epidemic that hit this camp. And there were 578 influenza casualties at this site. 16 were officers, 228 enlisted men, 4 nurses, and 1 civilian, all a result of the war effort. And finally, I'm going to close here because I see we're at 1 o'clock. And there is more, but perhaps another day we can talk from another perspective. 2 groups of people provided service during the war that rarely got recognition. In fact, most of a century went by before they gained the recognition that they justifiably deserved. You might guess that this is a symbol of American Indians who were providing services from many of the states in the West. The tradition among many of America's tribe, and Mark, it wasn't until the 1920s, by the way, John Rodman Wanamaker was largely responsible for that effort as well, that American civilization, American citizenship would be provided for American soldiers, regardless of where they had come from. What I'm saying is that Native Americans who were living on reservations or working as iron workers up in New York State, they had no citizenship rights until the 1920s, until they had served in the military. And then their role had really been overlooked, as well as Black soldiers, overlooked, even though they, as a minority population, provided heroic efforts. And there are some extraordinary monuments elsewhere in the country to both of those groups. This particular statue, done of a Native American, was done for a patriotic organization that called themselves the Red Men Associates, the Red Men's Associates. And they were considered a brotherhood like the Moose or the Elks. And each one of their chapters was named after a tribal name. Harkening back to the imaginary warriors of the past, taking on some identity, positive identity from Native Americans. However, they were exclusively for white people only. And there was a group in Camden, New Jersey that formed a Black Red Men's Association as well. However, both organizations ended up disappearing. I think in America there are only two chapters left of this organization that was one of a number of patriotic organizations that had evolved in the early teens and 1920s. However, it's a magnificent statue done of a Native American by an Italian immigrant who was a instructor of sculpture in Camden, New Jersey. And it was moved because it was on property owned by the current hospital when the hospital was expanded, and can now be found down in Tuckerton, New Jersey. And it's a shame that while it is a memorial established for the remembrance of those who belonged to the various chapters of this organization, it's a marvelous statue that brings to mind the contribution made by Native Americans. And it should be pointed out, among Native American present day culture, there is great respect and esteem for members of various tribes who've been members of the United States military service. They receive great recognition within their own culture, and they deserve even greater respect within the community as a whole. By 1930, people wanted to forget the military aspect of World War I. A decade had passed, and so this statue of two doughboys, done by that famous Gaetano Federici, was a reminder of what had happened. And unfortunately, within a very short period of time in the 1930s, a reminder of what would come in the near future. And this is found at an entire park established for the memorials of various conflicts that can be found in Paterson, New Jersey. I want to end it there because I know most of you have to go back to work. And it would be a pleasure to be able to expand this, but I don't want to deprive you of further time back at the office. So thank you very much. I hope this sampling has been aroused your curiosity. As you can see here in New Jersey, there's a lot to discover. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate all the work you've done and the research and highlighting all of these different memorials throughout this state. If anybody has questions, we do have some time. We can
We have
take your
plenty of
question.
time for questions. Yes.
So please feel free to send them using the Q&A or the chat buttons, and we'll be happy to address them. While we wait for maybe some to come in, can you talk about what got you interested in the World War One memorials?
Oh, that's easy to do. As the American centennial was coming, and I wish we had more time to talk about the current World War I monument, but perhaps someday we may talk about that exclusively. Um, Everyone was fascinated by the war side of it. The troops, the equipment, the methods that were being employed, um, the extraordinary logistics, every aspect of the war. And my feeling was, as interesting and fascinating as that is, as certainly part of our historic um, knowledge about World War One. What about the aftermath? Where are the lessons? What was the price that was paid? Uh, if you talk about the budget, you talk about how they did fundraising for the war. It's an extraordinary tale. And there are many aspects to World War One that are fascinating. But to me, it was the overlooked monuments that no one was really talking about. And then I began just exploring on my own and discovered that the monuments that I was familiar with were only a handful. Of some monuments were symbolic, but most monuments were architectural or a plaque on a wall or on a stone. And then I discovered that here we had literally a treasure of public art that was being overlooked, that was being taken for granted. You know, when you see something all the time, you forget what role it played and how important it was. And that's when I went on this quest of discovery, of discovering the extraordinary contribution that each of the towns made to remembering their dead and those who participated. They were proud of those who went. And I had some very interesting stories that I wish there was time to share with you about things that emerged that never would have happened had I not discovered these early monuments and how they were created. And the organizations that you didn't even expect would be ones that would help fund these monuments for almost every single one of them, including the monument that we're all familiar with in Trenton, which is the War Memorial that still, in my view, should be called the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Those Each one of them has a story to tell about their towns and their people. So that's how I got started.
Um, South Orange has small markers naming various small greens after Great War dead. Do other towns have anything similar?
Small markers, yes. In fact, small markers are quite common, and many towns use small markers on big stones. For example, the town of Glen Rock There is an enormous 580-ton boulder that weighs about the same as maybe 5 or 6 fully loaded tractor trailers. And it's in the center of town, and it's what the town was named after. And they have a small plaque on that rock. In northern New Jersey, because of the original um, glaciation that took place, we have enormous rounded rocks that have been used. And other places like Dumont have used the jagged rocks that originally came from the Palisades as war monuments with a plaque on it. So it's common to have plaques in many towns. Many towns use plaques for individuals as well as representing the entire town. The exception, as I say, is these monuments, which are showing a full-sized image. Um, some are bas relief, which of course is less expensive, but those that actually have a freestanding statue or two, like Patterson does, or like Weehawken, which we didn't get to yet, those statues were expensive, and it shows that there was a variety of contributions. One group, as a group that should be mentioned, you'd certainly expect veterans groups to be participating, and Boy Scouts and civil organizations. The Moose and I mentioned the Moose and the Elks. They were big contributors in their respective towns. But there's another group that often was more than willing to make major contributions. And those were immigrant cultural organizations, the Ukrainian organization, Hungarian organizations, Polish organizations, showing that, yes, they too were participants and proud of their American heritage and helped to support the symbols of American heritage and American contributions to the military. So, we hear so much negativity about immigrants, and I see nothing but positivity all throughout the state and the contributions that have been made, not only to the military, but directly and indirectly to the war effort. Any other questions? I don't have them in front of me, so.
What was the most expensive monument that appears in New Jersey?
Oh boy, is that a loaded question. Because it's all relative to time. I'm going to say, if you talk about the monument that's at Military Park, that's definitely one of the most expensive. In fact, they ran out of money for that monument, and the artist actually had to ship his casts over to Italy and have the casts done in Italy and shipped back. And there's a wonderful story. They were so grateful after World War One. They were so grateful to have participate in such a commission that Butz and Gorgon had been told when it was assembled that they had slipped a case of champagne inside, because it's all hollow, inside that enormous monument. So when they were redoing the monument, when it was being re-outfitted in the 1950s, it needed some extensive repair due to corrosion. Everybody wanted to know, well, where is the fabled case of champagne? But no one found it. We don't know whether there was one that just sort of mysteriously disappeared among the workers, or it was just said to have been placed there, but really was only, a legend. I think that one and the one at Edgemont are two of the most expensive. Um, there is another monument that if there's time, I can just touch on very briefly. And that monument is in I was going to go to a picture, but I don't have it handy. That is an entire plaza. This would be the most expensive if you included the property itself. And that is in Morristown, there is a center plaza where there is um, a looks like the tomb of the unknown soldier in the center. It has a marvelous bas relief on it. It is a plaza that has lamp stands and flag stands, all that are individually crafted with the names and imagery of the war. And it is all part of what was originally the Vale Mansion property. Overall, in terms of value, I would say without a doubt that site is the most expensive because it has a reflecting pool. It has elements that were originally part of the mansion, but were given over to the town by the Vale family because Mr. Vale never ended up living there. And so this entire setting takes up a memorial that's right downtown in the center of Morristown. And it is a extraordinary example of what is possible by using not only statuary and symbols, but also architecture and layout. That I would place as probably the most valuable.
Right. Well, I
By
don't
the
see.
way,
Okay.
the one that went to finally the World War One monument exceeded over $40 million that was created in New Jersey. And perhaps some future time we can talk about that because that's a monument that after all these years was finally funded as a result of the awareness program that resulted from the centennial celebration. In other words, all these states were researching about their past more than 100 years ago about World War I, and it made it possible to get private funding for what is an extraordinary example of private funding for a public monument, which is at Pershing Square in Washington, D.C. It is a monument that is deeply reliefed. It has multiple figures. It's entitled, you can look, by the way, you can look it up on YouTube. And there are excellent examples of not only seeing how it was made, uh, the, the, uh, the sculptural work was done in Bergen County, and it was by a prominent classical sculptor, but it was done in a very modern way because any sculpture done on that scale by one or two assistants and a primary sculptor would have taken many, many years. But using technology, a combination of technology and the original manual skills made it possible. It's 50 feet long and 15 feet high. And you can see it on YouTube. Look up A Soldier's Journey and the dedication ceremony, which was in September of this year, can be found on YouTube.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for a fascinating look into the history of the our commemoration in the state of World War One. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you all join us today.
And then thank you everybody for attending today. We really appreciate your time and hope that you found this as exciting as I did. So I just like to close with everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we will see you soon.
And thanks for remembering Armistice Day.